My father introduced me to 80 people as the daughter who escaped to Washington so she wouldn't have to do real work. He said it into a microphone. We were inside an American Legion Hall outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania, celebrating 45 years of Bennett Heavy Haul and Recovery, the company Walter Bennett had built from one borrowed tow truck and a gravel lot behind my grandfather's barn. The room was full of retired drivers, veterans, local business owners, and employees who knew exactly when my father expected them to laugh. He pointed first at my younger sister Natalie. That one stayed and built something. People clapped. Then he pointed at me. And Carrie? Carrie handles paperwork at the Pentagon. Somebody has to keep the printers running while people like Ryan do the real stuff. A few people laughed. I smiled too, not because it was funny, because when someone has been telling the same wrong story about you for 20 years, correcting them in public can feel more exhausting than letting them finish. My name is Caroline Bennett. I was 46 that fall, and I had served in the United States Army for 24 years. My father knew that much. What he didn't know, or had never bothered to learn, was what those years had actually contained. I had driven up from Washington that morning through cold October rain. I told myself I was going for my mother. Elaine had called 3 times that week and ended every conversation with the same sentence. It would mean a lot to your dad. My dad had a strange way of showing what meant a lot to him. Bennett Heavy Haul had always been the center of our family. Natalie and I did homework in the dispatch office while diesel engines idled outside. Dad measured character in early mornings, grease under your nails, and whether you could solve a problem without calling someone else. Natalie understood that language. She stayed, learned dispatch, then operations, and eventually took over most of the company. I left at 18 on an ROTC scholarship. Dad still called that taking the easy way out. Natalie was the first person to hug me when I entered the hall. You came. You weaponized Mom. That is what sisters are for. That made me laugh for real. Then she introduced Ryan Keene, her fiancé. Ryan was 41, an Army Ranger, quiet and broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness I recognized immediately. Dad had been talking about him for weeks, multiple deployments, combat experience, a real soldier. Ryan, this is my sister Carrie. He shook my hand. Good to finally meet you. You too. His eyes dropped briefly to my right hand. I was rolling a small silver challenge coin across my fingers without realizing it. Old habit. One side carried a mountain silhouette. The other had a compass rose and one word stamped beneath it. Atlas. Something changed in Ryan's face. Not shock. Concentration. Before he could speak, Dad appeared behind us. There she is. Washington finally gave her the weekend off. He slapped Ryan on the shoulder like they had known each other for years, hugged Natalie, then gave me the quick one-armed squeeze he usually gave distant relatives. For the next hour, he walked Ryan from table to table. Army Ranger, multiple deployments. Now that's a man who's done something. Every time he said it, he glanced at me just long enough to make sure the comparison landed. I kept my face calm. I had learned years ago that anger gave my father something to fight. Silence left him alone with his own words. Still, when he made the Pentagon joke into the microphone, something inside me tightened. Not because I needed the owner of Miller's Tire or Dad's retired dispatcher or some guy from the Rotary Club to know my title. I had stopped needing that kind of approval a long time ago. It hurt because my father had never asked. Not what I did, not who depended on me, not why there were years when I missed Christmas, birthdays, and one entire Pennsylvania summer. He had decided I was the daughter who pushed paper, and once Walter Bennett decided something, facts had a hard time getting through the door. The applause faded. Someone started cutting the anniversary cake. A couple of the older drivers drifted toward the coffee urn, talking about the Eagles and whether winter was going to hit early that year. I was pouring myself coffee when Ryan appeared beside me. He wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes went straight to the coin in my hand. "Carrie," he said quietly. "Yeah? Where did you get that?" I closed my fingers around it. For 1 second, I considered giving him the same harmless answer I had given people for years. Just something from work. Instead, I said, "A long time ago." Ryan looked at me again, really looked, and for the first time that night I saw something in someone's face that my father had never shown me. Recognition. Ryan didn't ask me about the coin again right away. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people, when they get curious, fill the silence because silence makes them uncomfortable. Ryan didn't. He just nodded once, took his coffee, and went back toward Natalie like he had decided whatever question was in his head could wait until he had more information. I respected that. The Army teaches you a lot of things that never appear in recruiting commercials, and one of them is that people who have actually been around serious situations usually don't rush to announce what they think they know. I slipped the Atlas coin back into my pocket and watched my father work the room. Walter Bennett loved a crowd. Give him 40 people, a microphone, and one story about pulling a wrecked tractor trailer out of an ice storm in 1989, and he could go all night. He remembered every engine size, every road name, every customer who had ever stiffed him on a bill. He could tell you exactly which employee had stayed late during the blizzard of '96 and which one had quit after 3 weeks because kids today don't know what tired means. What he could not tell you was the name of the first unit I commanded. For a long time, that bothered me more than I admitted. When I was 18, I thought leaving Lancaster would settle something between us. Dad had offered me a full-time position at Bennett Heavy Hall after high school. Dispatch first, then operations, maybe eventually management. It was his version of handing me a future. 3 weeks later, an ROTC envelope came in the mail. Full scholarship. I still remember setting it on the kitchen table. Dad read the first page, pushed it back toward me, and said, "So the taxpayers are paying for college. That's one way to say it. What's the catch?" 4 years active duty after graduation. He leaned back in his chair. "You hate getting up early." "I'm 18, Dad. Everybody hates getting up early." He didn't laugh. "What are you trying to prove?" That question followed me for years. At 22, when I commissioned, I thought I was proving I could finish something without his name attached to it. At 29, after my first deployment, I thought I was proving I could handle responsibility. By 37, I had stopped trying to prove anything to him at all. That was the strange part. The more responsibility I carried professionally, the less I felt like explaining myself at home. Once, after a promotion ceremony, I called him from a parking lot outside Fort Hood. "Dad, I got battalion command." There was a pause. Then he said, "That's good. Hey, your sister says the insurance company is killing us on the new fleet. You ever deal with government insurance contracts?" I sat there with my new orders on the passenger seat and realized he had already moved on. Another time, after I came back from overseas, he asked whether I was still doing logistics. I said, "Not exactly." He said, "Close enough." Eventually, close enough became the safest answer. So at the anniversary party, when people asked what I did, I said, "I'm in the Army." If they asked where, I said Washington. If they asked what kind of work, I said a little bit of everything. It made conversations easy. Then the storm rolled in. Pennsylvania weather has a way of changing its mind without warning. 1 minute people were standing outside near the old tow truck Dad had restored for the anniversary, taking pictures under a gray October sky. 20 minutes later, rain was hammering the Legion Hall roof so hard nobody could hear the country song coming through the speakers. The lights flickered once, then twice. Somebody near the bar said, "Well, hell." Dad laughed and yelled, "Building's older than half the people in here." Then a man went down near table 12. His name was Frank Delaney, 76, retired driver. I knew him mostly as the guy who had mailed me a $5 bill every birthday until I was 16. 1 second he was standing. The next his chair hit the floor. People froze. That happens more often than movies admit. When something goes wrong in a crowded room, most people don't become heroes or cowards. They become confused. Someone shouted for water. Someone else shouted to call 911. 3 people crowded Frank at once. I was moving before I thought about it. "Give him space." My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "You in the blue shirt, call 911. Put it on speaker." The man in the blue shirt pointed at himself. "Yes, you. Go." I knelt beside Frank. "Frank, can you hear me?" His skin was gray around the mouth. Pulse fast. Breathing shallow. "Natalie, find out if this building has an AED." She moved immediately. "Mom, get Dad away from the doorway. We need that entrance clear." Dad said, "Carrie, I can." "Dad, clear the entrance." Something in my tone stopped him. He did it. That mattered more to me than it should have. The dispatcher came over the phone. Possible cardiac event. Ambulance en route. But the storm had flooded part of Route 23 and delayed the nearest unit. A retired EMT named Gloria Hendricks pushed through the crowd. "I was EMS 20 years, she said. "Good. You're with me." No ego, no debate. That's another thing people misunderstand about leadership. It isn't knowing everything. It's knowing who in the room knows what you don't. Gloria checked Frank while I kept the area clear and relayed information. Natalie came back with an AED that looked older than Ryan. Pads are sealed, she said. Good. A young server started crying near the kitchen because she thought Frank was dying. I caught her eye. Hey, look at me. She did. Go outside and wave the ambulance in when it gets here. Yellow vest by the door. You can help. Giving scared people something useful to do is sometimes the fastest way to give them their brain back. She nodded and ran. Ryan was standing 10 feet away. He wasn't interfering. He was watching me. Not my face. My decisions. When the paramedics finally arrived, they came through a clear entrance, got a clean report from Gloria, and had Frank moving toward the ambulance in under 3 minutes. Before they left, one paramedic looked at me and said, "You EMS?" "No." "Incident command?" "Sometimes." He gave me a strange look but didn't have time to ask. The doors closed behind them. The room exhaled. Then my father said, loud enough for everybody nearby to hear, "See? Give Carrie a clipboard and she thinks she runs the world." A few people laughed. Not many this time. I looked at him. For half a second I saw something behind his smile. Embarrassment. Not because I had done anything wrong. Because people had listened to me before they listened to him. That was new. I could have corrected him. I could have said, "Dad, I have coordinated operations involving more people than this entire county has tow trucks." Instead, I picked up a chair someone had knocked over. "Frank's alive," I said. "That's the important part." Gloria Hendricks heard me. She squeezed my shoulder as she passed. "You did good, kid," I smiled. "Thanks, Gloria." My father was already telling someone how he had once performed CPR at a job site. Ryan found me 15 minutes later near the hallway leading to the coat room. Natalie was across the room talking to my mother. Dad was occupied. Ryan glanced around first. Then he said, "Can I ask you something? You seem determined to." That got half a smile out of him. "Were you ever assigned to Task Force Sentinel?" My hand stopped halfway to my pocket. Very few people outside a particular circle had any reason to know that name. "Why?" Ryan's eyes dropped toward the place where I had put the silver coin. "I saw one of those once," he said. "Where?" "Afghanistan." The room suddenly felt quieter than it was. I didn't answer. Ryan studied my face. Then he said 2 words. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just 2 words I had not heard spoken to me in years. "Atlas 6? For the first time that night, I wasn't thinking about my father. I was thinking about mountains, radio static, and a voice coming through a headset from 8,000 miles and 11 years away. For a few seconds, I just stood there looking at Ryan. Nobody had called me Atlas 6 in years. Not at the Pentagon, not at promotion ceremonies, not in rooms where people used General Bennett because protocol required it. Atlas 6 belonged to another version of me, to Afghanistan, to bad coffee and plywood command posts, to radios that never stopped talking, to nights when every decision had somebody's son or daughter attached to it. Ryan must have seen something change in my face because he lowered his voice. "So it was you." I glanced toward the banquet hall. My father was back near the stage, laughing with 2 former drivers like nothing unusual had happened. "What do you remember?" I asked. Ryan gave a short breath through his nose. "Enough." That answer told me more than a speech would have. "Ryan?" "Yes, Mom?" "Not here." He nodded immediately. "Understood. And that should have been the end of it. I honestly thought it would be." Then my father picked up the microphone again. The storm was still beating against the windows, but the power had stabilized. Someone had turned the music down. The anniversary cake had been cut into crooked squares, and people were drifting back toward their tables. Dad tapped the microphone twice. "All right, before everybody runs off on me." People laughed. That was Dad's natural habitat, a room waiting for him to talk. He thanked the employees who had been with the company 20 years. He thanked the guys who had driven through snowstorms, the mechanics who answered calls at 2 in the morning, the wives who put up with all of us idiots, which got another laugh. Then he called Natalie up. My sister looked surprised. "Come on, kiddo." She walked toward the stage. Dad put an arm around her shoulders. "This company survives because the next generation stayed." I saw Natalie's smile tighten. Dad didn't. She could have gone anywhere, but she stayed right here, learned the business, put in the hours. Didn't think she was too good for grease and diesel. There it was. Not my name. Not yet. But everybody in my family knew when a sentence was aimed at me, even if Dad fired it into the ceiling. Natalie leaned toward the microphone. Dad, he waved her off. I'm bragging on you. Then he spotted Ryan. And speaking of people who understand what hard work actually looks like, Ryan, get up here. Ryan didn't move. Dad laughed. Come on, don't get shy on me now. Ryan stood slowly. I could tell he didn't want to go. Natalie could tell too. But refusing would have created its own scene, so he walked up and stood beside her. Dad looked delighted. This man served with the Army Rangers, multiple combat deployments, the kind of guy who goes where the rest of us only see on the news. A few veterans in the room nodded. Ryan looked uncomfortable. My father mistook discomfort for humility. That's service, Dad continued. That's putting yourself on the line. I looked down at my coffee. I knew what was coming before he said it. Now, Carrie's got her military career too. There were a few polite glances in my direction. She's done fine. Government work, Washington meetings, paperwork, whatever they do down there. I heard Natalie say, Dad, stop. He smiled. What? I'm proud of her. Then came the line that did it. She just never had the stomach for the hard stuff. The room changed. I don't know how else to explain it. Nobody gasped. Nobody dropped a glass. It just became very still. Even Dad seemed to notice that the joke had not landed. Natalie stepped away from him. Enough! This time she said it loudly enough for the microphone to catch it. Dad frowned. Nat, I'm kidding. No, you're not. That hit him harder than I expected. Before he could answer, Ryan reached for the microphone. Not aggressively. He just held out his hand. Mr. Bennett. Dad looked confused, then handed it over. Ryan stood there for a moment. I knew that look. He was making a decision. Sir, he said, can I ask you a question? Dad smiled because he still thought he controlled the room. Sure. Do you actually know what your daughter does in the Army? Dad gave a little shrug. She works at the Pentagon. What does she do there? Logistics, administration, something like that. What rank is she? Dad glanced toward me. I watched him search his memory. Colonel? Ryan didn't answer. He looked at me instead, and suddenly everyone else did too. I hated that part. Not because I was ashamed, because I had spent years making sure my rank was never the most interesting thing about me when I came home. Ryan took one step off the stage. Carrie. I raised my eyes to him. If you want me to stop, tell me. My father looked from him to me. What is this? I could have ended it right there. Maybe I should have. Instead, I said nothing. Sometimes silence is permission. Sometimes it just means you're tired of protecting somebody from information they worked very hard not to learn. Ryan seemed to understand the difference. He handed the microphone to Natalie, stepped completely off the stage and faced me. Then he straightened. His whole posture changed. Several veterans in the room noticed before anybody else did. Ryan said clearly, Brigadier General Caroline Bennett, United States Army. My father stopped smiling. 1-star general, Ryan continued, currently serving on the Joint Staff in Washington. No one moved. I heard the generator humming somewhere behind the kitchen. Rain hit the roof. That was it. Those were the only sounds. Dad blinked at Ryan, then at me. A general? The way he said it almost hurt more than the jokes. Not because he sounded angry, because he sounded small, like he had suddenly realized the map in his head had been wrong for years. I nodded once. Yes. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Ryan wasn't finished. He looked toward my hand. The coin. I knew exactly where this was going. Ryan. He stopped. For 1 second, I considered telling him no. Then I looked at my father. I remembered being 22 and calling home after commissioning. 31, and trying to explain my second deployment while Dad asked whether federal employees got better dental insurance. 38, and telling him I had taken command, only to have him interrupt me because one of his wreckers needed a transmission. I wasn't angry anymore. That was almost worse. I was tired. Ryan spoke carefully. General, were you Atlas 6 with Task Force Sentinel in Kunar Province in 2015? Every veteran in the room was listening now. Yes. Ryan stared at me for a second, like he needed to hear it from my mouth even though he already knew. Then he looked at my father. I was there. Natalie turned toward him. What? Ryan swallowed. Our ranger element got cut off during an operation in the valley. Weather shut down one route. We lost communications with one of our support teams. The original extraction plan was gone. His voice was different now. Flat, precise. The way people talk when what they're describing is too real for performance. We were pinned down for hours. Dad said nothing. Ryan pointed toward me. Atlas 6 reorganized the air corridor, moved a medical evacuation window, redirected support that wasn't originally hers to move, and kept the extraction from falling apart. I remembered pieces of it now. A map covered in grease pencil. A weather officer telling me conditions were closing. A pilot saying we had one window. Someone on the radio asking me whether I was sure. I had said no, do it anyway. Ryan's eyes stayed on my father. 43 of us came out. Dad's face had gone pale. Ryan said, I was number 37. No one laughed now. Nobody even shifted in their chairs. My father looked at me. Really looked. Ryan's next words came quietly. Your daughter didn't push paper that night, sir. Then he faced me, and in a room filled with truck drivers, Legion members, old photographs, half-eaten cake, wet coats, and people who had known me since I was a kid, Major Ryan Keene came to attention and rendered a salute. My chest tightened, not because I needed it, because I understood what he meant by it. I stood, returned it, and when we both lowered our hands, I looked past him toward my father. Walter Bennett had spent 24 years believing I had left Pennsylvania because I couldn't handle hard work. Now a man he had spent all evening calling a hero was standing between us, telling him I was one of the reasons 43 soldiers had made it home. Dad looked like he wanted to say something. For once in his life, he had nothing. And I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won. I just felt sad that it had taken a room full of strangers, an Army Ranger, and a story from Afghanistan for my own father to finally wonder who his daughter actually was. Nobody knew what to do after the salute. That was the part no one tells you about moments like that. In movies, somebody always has the perfect line ready. The person who was wrong breaks down. The person who was hurt finally says everything they have been carrying for 20 years. Music swells, people cry, and somehow everybody leaves the room understanding exactly what changed. Real life is messier. At the American Legion Hall, somebody's plastic fork hit a plate. The coffee machine clicked off. Outside, the rain had finally started to ease. My father stood beside the microphone with both hands hanging at his sides. Then he said the first thing people usually say when a truth makes them uncomfortable. You never told me. I looked at him. There were 100 angry answers available to me. I had rehearsed some of them over the years without realizing it. Instead, I said, I tried. Dad shook his head. No, I would remember something like this. You remember what you let yourself hear. His jaw tightened. I knew that look. Walter Bennett had spent most of his adult life winning arguments by lasting longer than everyone else. I'm serious, Carrie. A general? You don't think maybe that's something you mention? I felt Natalie shift beside Ryan. Mom whispered, Walter, but this time I didn't let her rescue the room. I called you when I got battalion command. Dad opened his mouth. You asked me about a transmission. His face changed slightly. I told you when I came back from my 3rd deployment. That was years ago. You spent 20 minutes telling me about a driver who backed into a loading dock. A couple of people nearby suddenly became very interested in their cake. Dad looked around the hall, embarrassed. That was when I realized he still thought this was about what everyone else had just learned. It wasn't. You didn't know because you never asked a second question, I said. That stopped him. Not the rank, not Afghanistan. That sentence. My mother sat down at the nearest table. She looked older than she had an hour earlier. I knew some of it, she said. I turned toward her. Dad did too. Elaine folded her hands. I knew Carrie had command positions. I knew she was promoted. I knew she was doing important work in Washington. Dad stared at her. You knew she was a general? No. Mom's voice shook. But I knew enough to know you were wrong about her. There it was, a different kind of silence. My mother had spent most of my childhood smoothing things over. If Dad got loud, she changed the subject. If Natalie and I argued, she made dessert. If somebody's feelings got hurt, she found a practical task that needed doing. She called it keeping the peace. For years, I had called it kindness because the alternative was admitting that sometimes peace for one person is silence for another. Mom looked at me. I should have said more. I swallowed. I know you love me. I do, but loving me privately while letting him make me the joke publicly wasn't the same as standing up for me. Her eyes filled. I hated saying it. I also knew I meant it. Natalie came over and sat beside her. I should have said more, too. I shook my head. No. She looked at Dad, then at me. You know what being the favorite kid does to you? Dad flinched. Natalie laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. You spend your whole life making sure you never do anything that might get you moved to the other column. That one landed. She told us she had turned down a job in Pittsburgh at 27 because Dad had told everyone she was the one who would keep the company in the family. She had never told him she wanted to leave. She had never told me either. For the first time, I saw our childhood from her side. I had been punished by being underestimated. Natalie had been rewarded by being trapped. Different cage, same house. Dad sat down. For once, nobody rushed to make him feel better. After most of the guests had gone, he asked me to walk with him across the parking lot to the old shop behind the hall. The storm had left everything wet and shining under the security lights. Inside, the place smelled like rubber, oil, and cold metal. The walls were covered with 45 years of Bennett history, photos of Dad beside trucks, Natalie at ribbon cuttings, newspaper clippings, employee awards, little league teams the company had sponsored. I found one picture of myself, high school graduation, before the Army. Dad noticed me looking at it. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. I really screwed this up. I didn't answer. I thought you looked down on all this. He gestured around the shop. The business, the town, me. I never looked down on it. You left. I grew up. He nodded slowly. Maybe for the first time he understood those were not the same thing. Then he said, I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. No tears. No hug. Just 2 words from a man who had always found them difficult. I believed he meant them. I also knew meaning them once wasn't enough, so I told him the truth. I'm not doing this anymore, Dad. He looked confused. Doing what? Coming home so you can use my life as the punchline. His face fell. If I come to dinner, or Christmas, or another company event, you don't get to make me smaller so somebody else can look bigger. I was joking. I know. That was the problem. He looked down at the concrete. All right? No, Dad? Not all right, like you're waiting for me to get over it. He looked back at me. I hear you. We stood there for a while. Then Walter Bennett did something he had almost never done in my entire adult life. He asked a question without already knowing what answer he wanted. So what does a brigadier general actually do? I stared at him. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to say, you had 24 years. Instead, I leaned against an old tool cabinet. Well, I said, how much time do you have? Dad pulled over a metal shop chair. For once, he sat down, as much as it takes. 6 months later, my father called me on a Tuesday morning while I was walking between meetings at the Pentagon. That alone was new. For most of my adult life, Dad called when something was wrong with Mom's car, when Natalie had news, or when he needed to complain about taxes. He had never been the kind of father who called just to ask what I was doing. You busy? He asked. I'm at work, so yes. I smiled. What's up? There was a pause. Lancaster High is doing their scholarship ceremony next month. Okay, I put some money toward an ROTC scholarship. I stopped walking. Dad kept talking fast, which was how Walter Bennett handled being nervous. Nothing huge, just enough to help with books and some expenses. Kid doesn't have to go Army either. Could be Air Force, Navy, whatever. I'm not trying to pick branches. Dad. What? That's a good thing. He went quiet. Then he said, I thought maybe you could come. So I did. The ceremony was held in the same high school auditorium where Natalie had performed in Oklahoma, and where I had once sat through a 3-hour senior awards night, convinced my father would fall asleep in the folding chair beside me. This time, he was in the front row before I arrived. Mom was beside him. Natalie and Ryan were there too. Frank Delaney had recovered from the heart scare and was sitting 3 rows back wearing a Bennett heavy haul cap and arguing with somebody about baseball. Life had moved on. That mattered. Dad had not become a different person overnight. He still interrupted sometimes. He still gave advice nobody asked for. 2 months after the anniversary party, he called my work, the Washington thing, and immediately caught himself. Your joint staff work, he corrected. It was awkward. It was also effort. And at 72, effort was the only kind of apology I was interested in measuring anymore. When the principal introduced the scholarship, he asked Dad to say a few words. I braced myself out of habit. Walter Bennett with a microphone had historically been a risky combination. Dad stepped to the podium. He talked briefly about the company, about growing up without much money, about how opportunity could change a kid's life if someone opened the right door at the right time. Then he looked toward me. This is my oldest daughter, Caroline. I felt my shoulders tighten, he continued. Brigadier General Caroline Bennett, United States Army. There was applause. Dad waited for it to stop. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. I spent a lot of years thinking I knew what she had become. He looked down at the podium. I didn't. No joke, no explanation, no attempt to make himself look better, just the truth. I was proud of the kind of work I understood, and I made the mistake of thinking work I didn't understand mattered less. The auditorium was completely quiet. I hope whoever receives this scholarship remembers something it took me too long to learn. He looked toward the students. Don't let somebody else's limited understanding become the limit you put on yourself. I had spent years imagining what it would feel like to hear my father say he was proud of me in public. I thought it would feel bigger. Instead, it felt peaceful. Maybe because by then I understood something I hadn't understood at 22 or 30 or even 40. I had not become worthy when my father finally recognized me. I had been worthy while he misunderstood me. That difference had taken me half my life to learn. After the ceremony, we walked across the parking lot together. Dad's restored 1978 heavy wrecker was parked near the entrance as part of a local history display. The old Bennett Heavy Haul slogan was still painted across the side. We move what others can't. Dad caught me looking at it. Good slogan, he said. A little dramatic. Sold a lot of tow jobs. I laughed. Then he asked, How long are you in town? Until tomorrow morning. Breakfast? I looked at him. 6:30? He grinned. That's sleeping in. Some things move with horsepower. Some things need cranes, chains, and men who know exactly where to put the weight. And some things sit inside families for decades. Old assumptions, old resentments, old versions of people we stopped questioning years ago. Those are heavier. But I learned they can move too, not because somebody finally salutes you, not because a title proves you mattered, not even because the person who hurt you apologizes. They start moving when you stop accepting somebody else's small story about who you are. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the people who love you decide to move with you. The deepest lesson in Caroline's story is that your worth does not begin the moment someone finally recognizes it. Sometimes the people closest to us hold on to an old version of who we are because it is easier than admitting they stopped paying attention. That can happen in families, marriages, workplaces, and friendships. Over time, being underestimated can become so familiar that we start shrinking ourselves just to keep the peace. But silence has a cost. There comes a point when protecting everyone else from discomfort means abandoning your own dignity. Standing up for yourself does not always require anger, revenge, or humiliating the person who hurt you. Sometimes it is simply saying, calmly and clearly, "You do not get to define me this way anymore." Caroline did not become accomplished when her father learned the truth. She had already built a life of courage, sacrifice, discipline, and service. What changed was not her value, but his willingness to see it. And that may be one of life's hardest truths. People can love us and still misunderstand us. They can hurt us and still be capable of growth. As the old saying goes, actions speak louder than words. Real change is not one apology. It is what someone chooses to do afterward. If this story made you think about someone in your own life or about a time you were underestimated, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your story if you feel comfortable. Give this video a like if its message meant something to you. And subscribe for more powerful stories about dignity, second chances, and the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground. Wherever life finds you today, I hope you find the courage to protect your peace, the wisdom to know your worth, and the hope to believe that even long-held walls can still begin to move.